When I switched to the Canon R system in 2020, I really missed one lens in Canon's lineup, a proper fast 35mm. A focal length that I love to shoot photos with and especially use for all of my talking head videos. I tried the RF 35mm 1.8 STM, but it was absolutely not for me. I thought such an important prime lens would surely come soon, especially with all the rumors about being on the roadmap. And so the years passed by. In between there were rumors that it would even be in 1.2 lens, which I would definitely take. Then it was said it would be 1.4 again, but what was clear to me was that when this lens finally arrives, it would be expensive as usual for Canon, but it would also be really good. The wait would be worth it, everyone would rave about it, and I would be almost perfectly happy with my R system. And the constant whining for third-party lenses for Canon's RF mount would finally stop and come to an end. That it actually took until 2024, I would never have thought 4 years ago. It's such an important lens for every system and a must-have. But here it is now, the RF 35mm 1.4 L VCM, that not only I have been waiting for so long. And if Canon took so long to release it, it must really deliver. Right? Well, let's see. I'm David, you are watching the Division, and let's go. If you noticed that you enjoyed the video, remember to like, subscribe and hit the bell. And feel free to check out my Instagram as well. Where the RF 35mm 1.4 L VCM completely meets the expectations is the price. You could argue that 1,900 euros is cheaper than the 35mm 1.4 EFL version 2. Then Canon shooters might think they are really getting a real bargain. But we are not. Let's take a look at the competition. And then it's another 400 euros more than an already not so cheap Sony 35mm 1.4 G Master. And a few days ago, Nikon finally introduced the 35mm 1.4 for Z mount at 750 euros. So a whopping 1,150 euros cheaper than this Canon lens here. And I would say with this price, Canon has put quite a bit of pressure on itself. So it has to deliver. And in the past, expensive Canon lenses have mostly convinced me. I absolutely love my 85 1.2. The 28 to 70 2.0 is still impressive, and expect from the 50mm 1.2 I've had very little to complain about the other RFL prime lenses I've had in my hands. The RF 35mm 1.4 is pleasantly small and compact, which is very unusual for a Canon RFL prime lens, weighing at 555 grams with a diameter of 76mm and a length of 99mm and a filter diameter of 67mm. These are exactly the dimensions of Sony's 35mm 1.4 G Master and pretty much the same dimensions as my Sigma 35mm 1.2 HSM EF mount. Although it's significantly heavier. Only thing is, it still needs an adapter to fit on my modern cameras. The build quality of the lens is usually decent. The lens is made of high quality plastics, which is very robust. All of my similar lenses with the same material still look and feel top notch. There's a large focus ring with very good resistance, the familiar RF control ring on the front, and brand new to a Canon lens, no, the 24 to 105 2.8Z also has it. It's an aperture ring, but it has its quirks. Firstly, it unfortunately has no clicks, so you can't feel the aperture stops. Other manufacturers allow switching between noticeable clicks and smooth movement of the aperture in almost every case, and Canon does not. If you don't want or need it, you can lock it to the A position, and that's probably where the most people will keep it for most of the time. Because this aperture ring is not usable in photo mode with current cameras. And from the way Canon phrases it, it will not be in the future through firmware updates, which is absolutely nonsense. Because in video mode, the aperture ring is already usable with any cameras without any updates. No one can tell me it wouldn't be possible to make this aperture ring usable for photos with a simple update. But well, for photos, the noticeable stops will still be missing a lot. Anyway, moving on, there's an AF/MF switch for manual focus control and this button on the lens that maybe you are familiar with from the competition, and it's new since the RF 135 1.8. The lens is, of course, like every RFL lens, sealed against dust and splash water, with a nice rubber lip on the back of the bayonet, and I feel confident to use such a lens in the rain with my Canon R system. Overall, I find the lens very appealing in terms of look and feel. Exactly how I imagine a modern 35mm 1.4. It's handy, not too big, not too heavy, nice balance on the body. The very small front lens, on the other hand, I don't like so much in terms of appearance, but that's not too wild. And if it had been a f1.2 lens, it could have been bigger and heavier as well, maybe even more expensive, I think. What I don't like through is the quirk that comes with the VCM in the name. That stands for Voice Coil Motor and is the first lens with such an autofocus motor from Canon. So no USM, no STM, but VCM. This voice coil autofocus motor is supposed to enable silent autofocus in theory, and it does. In practice, however, the VCM is only silent when the camera is turned on. Because when the camera is off, the motor has no power and no longer holds its lens group in position. And this causes the lens to rattle. At first I thought it might be a little bit like when you have lenses with image stabilizer, where you feel the IS lens group move when it's off. But here it's much stronger. The entire focus group is in motion. You can even hear it from the inside of your backpack when you are walking. And when the camera is hanging from a shoulder strap, you will be accompanied by the lens rattle with every step you take. According to Canon, this is completely normal. And it was even mentioned in the initial presentation videos from Canon to avoid confusion, stating that it's completely normal. But just because they say it's normal doesn't mean it's great. This rattling is not only annoying, but also gives the lens a cheap feel that simply shouldn't be there at the 1,900 euros price tag, I think. Additionally, VCM is not a particularly new technology that hasn't existed before. Tamron's VXD autofocus motors, for example, are also voice coil motors and do not rattle in the off state. And I suspect the focus group of a huge 35-150 from Tamron is quite a bit heavier than that in the 35mm 1.4 prime lens here. The optical design consists of 14 lenses in 11 groups and, like many premium lenses nowadays, offers 11 rounded aperture plates. Both very similar to the design of Sony's 35mm 1.4 G Master and also to the EF mount predecessor version. The close focus distance is almost identical at 27mm, only the reproduction ratio is slightly worse here at 1 to 5.5. Since the lens is smaller, it's not so close to the thing you are shooting. But let's see if it can live up to the hype, and especially the price. Let's first take a look at the sharpness of this lens. In my usual sharpness tests, the lens performs quite well. It is very sharp in the center of the image, wide open, showing all the details that should be there. Towards the edges, the sharpness slightly decreases. At the edge, it is still more than sufficiently sharp for a 35mm 1.4 at f1.4, but you can see a difference to the center. The sharpness tests were conducted with my Canon R5C in photo mode with 45 megapixel. That's the highest resolution you can get on Canon's R system now. Stopping down helps the lens especially at the edges, where you see a significant difference with the step to f2.0 or f2.8. The center becomes a little bit crisper at f2.0, but it's hardly worth mentioning since 1.4 is already very good and all the other steps doesn't improve the sharpness in the center. In practice, I was absolutely satisfied with the results of the lens wide open. Sharpness was never an issue, and comparing it to my previous Sigma 35mm 1.4, the progress in terms of sharpness is clearly visible. It's like a night and day difference in terms of sharpness. But even the Canon 35 1.8 STM was at least decently sharp. Maybe not as sharp as this one here, but not problematic either. Other things on this cheaper lens bothered me, and let's take a look at these other things with this lens here. First of all, chromatic aberrations, which were one of the most annoying points of the RF 35mm 1.8 for me. And they are unfortunately not gone here either. Like most modern lens designs, this one is designed with a lens profile correction in mind, meaning some points that can easily be corrected digitally are less considered in the lens construction. And I can understand this approach with chromatic aberrations. at least the lateral ones, which are the colored contrast edges, and correcting them brings no disadvantage to your image. In practical use I saw very little of this, even without the active correction profile and in challenging backlit situations such as hair edges with backlights. But here on the backpack you can clearly see chromatic aberrations on the strap. But in my usual test with leaves and branches against a bright sky it looks totally different. There, unfortunately, it glows with colorful aberrations even when the profile correction and CA correction are enabled in Lightroom. Although these CAs could be almost entirely removed just with 2 clicks of my own work. Longitudinal chromatic aberrations, shortly Bokeh, however, are not easy to fix. These are the color changes in the foreground and background blur. Fast lenses are particularly prone to this, and it's not different here. Even that I hoped for a better situation at this price point. There are reddish tints in the foreground and greenish tints in the background, and that doesn't look nice. So both types of chromatic aberrations are present here. Not worse than the competition, but not better either. In practice, these types of CAs lead to brightly colored contrast edges in the foreground or background, as seen here on the backpack, or glasses can quickly become a problem when they are reflecting on the metal parts or something. This is definitely not masterpiece in terms of CAs. But let's move on to a very important point for me, the bokeh. The subject isolation is a significant topic for me in almost any prime lenses that I use. Except of course for astro lenses. I like to shoot wide open precisely for this look and for the subject isolation, and I prefer the 35mm look. And here there's more shadow than light. The nice thing is that the bokeh circles don't have strange contrast edges around them, which would lead to strong soap bubble bokeh effect in practice. What's not so nice is that the bokeh circles are not entirely clear. You can clearly see the so-called onion rings in the bokeh circles. When I compare this to my Sigma 35mm 1.4 HSM EF, it looks similar but more pronounced on the older Sigma. However, a new 1,900 euros Canon lens should not be compared to a 12-year-old Sigma design, but to current top lenses. For example, the Sigma 35mm 1.4 DGDN. That has much clearer bokeh circles. And Sony's 35mm 1.4 G Master also performs significantly better in this case. Additionally, the designs of this lens apparently affect the shape of the bokeh. Smaller lenses cause the bokeh circles to be cut off more quickly away from the image center, taking on the cat's eye or football shape that you maybe know. Compared to other 3 mentioned lenses, this is noticeably worse here. All of the other lenses maintain relatively round circles for much longer away from the image center. In practice, the bokeh doesn't look too bad at first glance. However, what I didn't like is the sometimes uneven effect, to which the onion rings are also contribute. And well away from the image center, the circles are hardly round anymore, but also can be distracting, because in the image center there's mostly a subject. Maybe it's not the biggest problem, but it could simply be better, like the competition shows, and I would expect the best performance from one of the most expensive lenses in this class. And in Canon's RF system, bokeh was never an issue for me. For example, with lenses like 50-1.2, 85-1.2, 2870 2.0, it was all very good. I've only seen such onion rings on RF-L lenses in the 24-70 2.8, for example, but that's a standard zoom lens and not a prime lens. Next, let's take a look at distortion and vignetting. And since I already mentioned that this lens was designed with a correction profile in mind, you know what's coming. Although, well, maybe not necessarily, because the Sony G Master or Sigma DGDN weren't too bad in terms of distortion and vignetting. Sometimes I even said I don't necessarily need a correction profile for these lenses. This is completely different here. I don't want to exaggerate, but this is the worst 35mm lens I have tested in terms of distortion. Without the correction profile, the field of view is completely different, and no line except this one, particularly through the image center, remains straight. If I try to manually straighten the lens, I end up with plus 27 to compensate for the barrel distortion. This is a level I would expect from a wide-angle zoom lens, but not from a prime lens at this price point. And as I said, no other 35mm lens I had distorted this much. Not even the cheaper RF 35 1.8 STM. And not even my wide-angle zoom lens 15 to 35 2.8 distorts as much at 15mm as this lens here. So what's the deal with this? Looking at the vignetting, this extent becomes clearer again. The vignetting is simply enormous. Yes, this is without a correction profile. If I manually correct the distortion and apply a similar crop as Canon would like, the vignetting still remains enormous. And again, I have to say my old Sigma vignettes less in a similar situation. This lens here is digitally enhanced through and through. Since the profiles are now integrated into Capture One and Lightroom, you don't see this distortion and vignetting as much. But when shooting in low light conditions, you might wonder why the corners of the image at high ISOs suddenly have significantly more noise than the center. Yes, that's due to vignetting correction, where the corners are artificially brightened by the profile correction to eliminate this natural occurring vignetting. I've also done astrophotos with a 35mm 1.4 and you wouldn't enjoy this with this lens either here. I still can understand distortion corrections to a certain extent. Physics has its limits. And if you can omit elements that optically correct distortion, lenses can achieve much better resolution. A 10 to 20mm f4 would not be possible without digital corrections, and therefore it's significantly smaller, lighter, sharper, overall better than the old EF 11 to 24 f4. But that's talking about an ultra wide angle zoom lens and not a near standard prime lens at 35mm, which doesn't need such tricks usually. And why does the competition manage to build similarly small, light and often better and overall cheaper 35 1.4 lenses without this? Shouldn't the possibility of digital corrections and the reduced effort at least ensure that lenses become a little bit cheaper and not more expensive? Oh, and if I attach this lens, which is obviously also made for video, to a Canon R5C or the new C400 and shoot raw video with it, I have to figure out how to remove the distortion and vignetting in post from my video files, and instead of 35mm field of view I saw in the viewfinder, I ended up with something like around 30mm or so. I also did a quick Coma test for all the astrophotography enthusiasts and it looks okay at f1.4. Since a 35mm lens is also quite a good all-rounder everyday lens, Sunstars are also quite interesting. From f11 you can call them Sunstars. They look okay, but nothing special. What is also quite noticeable is the severe ghosting the lens shows at these pictures. At a closed aperture you can see clear internal reflections of the lens elements with a light source in the frame. You can see circular rainbow flares and many colors that doesn't belong there, like the blue tint here or the purple tint here. And when you open the aperture, like I do for backlit portraits, it gets really wild. Here are some pictures wide open. This is not just a drop in contrast due to backlight, the backlight performance is completely garbage. You can already guess these lines here in the background from the light source, and now look at these pictures here. It really spoils it for me. This lens is supposed to cost 1,900 euros and delivers backlight performance like a 400 euro Samyang lens. And especially if you trust Canon's product features as a customer, you will end up quite feeling fooled. At least I have no complaints about the autofocus itself. I consider the VCM technology superior to the USM motors. I hear absolutely nothing from the autofocus, unlike sometimes with my 24-70 2.8. This lens here is completely silent. The autofocus is fast and reliable. If only it didn't have this annoying rattle when turned off. I find that really cheap and wonder how it made it through development at a manufacturer with such a premium self-image like Canon. But there is still something positive to say about this lens. but we already knew this from Canon's presentation. Since the lens is also intended for video use, special attention was paid to ensuring that the lens shows little to no focus briefing. This means there is no focal length change while focusing, which is common in many photo prime lenses today and can be extremely irritating for videos. For example, when you want to use a focus pull or something holding closer to the camera or move towards the camera with autofocus on. These were recordings of my Sigma 35mm 1.4 EF, which has severe focus briefing. Just like Sony's G Master, like Sigma's more modern lenses, and unfortunately almost every photo lens on the market. The RF 35mm 1.4 L VCM shows so little focus briefing that I couldn't really recognize it as such, which is extremely well controlled here and which I like a lot. And the video autofocus also works silently, quickly and reliably. I've now filmed 3 of my talking head videos for my German channel, and this entire video here was completely shot with this lens. I had actually planned to use this lens permanently attached to my R5C and shoot all my videos. But well, I think you know I won't be doing that if you followed the video this far. But let's get to the conclusion. For me, the lens mainly fulfilled one expectation, which is that this lens is expensive. And at this price, I would have expected a nearly flawlessly great lens. The positives are the size, the weight, the sharpness, and for me as a videographer, the non-existent focus briefing while focusing. Okay, that's it. And the list of my downsides is significantly longer. The rattling from the autofocus motor, the bokeh, the CAs in every form, the extreme distortion, the strong vignetting, the really atrocious backlight performance. And all of this had led me to cancel my personal pre-order for this lens. I don't want a 1,900 euros lens that only looks decent through image processing, which is basically what a profile correction is. And not even that changed anything about the other weaknesses like the bokeh or the backlit performance. I struggled with this decision for a long time. I don't actually plan to turn my back on Canon, and I need a 35mm lens for my work, yes, especially for videos. But I think it sends the wrong signal to buy this unworthy piece of glass from Canon at the called price. This is overall for me the worst RFL lens I've tested so far. Not just for the primes. An MTF chart is nice, but it's just one point of a lens performance, and all the other things are really bad here. You can find my other lens reviews on my German YouTube channel. There are usually translated subtitles under the videos. So for now, for me, the things will stay as they are. It worked so far, and I will continue filming with my Sigma lens. Even I wanted to send it to its well-deserved retirement after the announcement of the RF 35 1.4. And if you are surprisingly convinced by what the Canon RF 35mm 1.4 can do, you will find links to the lens under the video in the video descriptions. And if you buy through these links, you support this channel for free and ensure that I can continue to make such videos for you. Feel free to tell me what you think about this lens in the comments or join my Discord server. If you liked the video, leave a like under the video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and hit the bell so you don't miss any future videos from me. So, alright folks, sorry for taking your ear off. That's it for today from Davision, and I will say goodbye until next time.